Okay, so I'm going to give you some tips. This is how I read an RFP, which may not be the order you read it in. But again, this is the order I would recommend you just take a quick skim when you're looking at it, right? You want to look at, you want to look at the deadlines. For instance, the closing date. Are you going to be in Jamaica then? If you are, you're not competing on this, right? Right out of the bat. Is there a mandatory meeting when your best friend's getting married? Well, then you're not going to be at that either. So you just want to make sure you can meet the very basic dates. Obviously, you want to look at the overview, the project scope, and ask yourself, what's the big picture? And more importantly, should we be competing on this? Do we have a realistic chance of winning? Is it worth our time to compete? Do we know right away that our competitor has a better chance than us? If so, don't compete, right? You want to bid on those things that are a good use of your time and that you know you'll be able to have a reasonable chance of winning. You may not know, or you may be really surprised by, a competitor coming out of the blue and surprising you, but you really want to address your mind to whether it's a good opportunity for you, a good fit or not, right? You got to ask yourself those questions at the beginning. The mandatory criteria, can you meet them right off the bat, right? If you don't have any registered psychologists and that's a mandatory, it's not gonna fly. So just, you're out, right? Desirables, are you going to excel at this? Do you have a quick plan in your head of, okay, yeah, we can really shine on these points. We're going to propose something really good to them. If so, then, go ahead. If not, again, it's not a good use of your time. Percentage scoring, I talked about that. That shows you where you need to focus your time, right? You need to focus it on the highest scoring category. And then, of course, I would reread it several times and maybe get another person to read it at least, because honestly, you'll just find new things in that document all the time. And probably put tabs and, other practical things in so that you know where the important bits are. And those are the ones you want to reread, obviously. This is what I do. Again, this is just a personal suggestion. You don't have to do it this way, but I've just found this is a good way that works for me. If you have 2 weeks, hopefully you have more time than that, but usually I seem to never have more than 2 weeks in terms of a response. I get cracking on a first draft right away, right out of the gate, which may seem early, but it gets your mind started working on the best ways to attack something, right? You should do at least 2 drafts to get a really good final product if you can. Sometimes you can't. If you have to get other quotes from other people or hire subcontractors or whatever you have to do, partner with folks, you want to get that information well ahead of the final draft because you're going to have to integrate it with your own information or other information, right? Again, these are not set in stone at all. These are just practices that I do for myself. Why is your final deadline for yourself the day before it's due?
Because you never know.
Sorry?
Well, you never know what might happen.
Nope. And because there are snowstorms, courier strikes, fire drills, you name it, it can happen, and it has happened. So you need to make sure it's the day before, or sometimes you're just missing an essential piece of information, or you can't get a pricing component. You name it, sky's the limit. Again, of course, I've been going on and on about this. Ask as many questions as you can during the question period. The more narrow you can get the focus of the RFP to be, the less time you'll need to spend writing it and the better your proposal will be, right? If you could get another person to read through the final draft, please do that. Reread the mandatory criteria the second last day. This happened to somebody I was helping, right? We missed one completely. But luckily they had time to make sure they met it. And again, the day before, make sure you know exactly where their proposal acceptance takes place. Like the building, is there parking there? Client called me 2 weeks ago. Do you know where this building is? No, I don't. Why are you not looking at Google? I don't know where. I don't know where it is. So make sure you know where it is exactly. Because again, what happens? Flat tires, fuel shortages, I don't know. Anything can happen. So give yourself a lot of time. And hopefully the closing time is usually around at 2 o'clock or some earlier time, because they don't want people to run into the predictable risks of traffic, rush hour, accidents, those types of things. So if you can get it in a couple hours early, great, even better.
Is it best to hand deliver them, do you think, or couriers?
Depends how paranoid you are. I'm pretty paranoid, so.
Are you allowed to submit it a day before, or does it have to be on that day?
No, you can submit it prior. And that's why they make the last amendments like 3 days before, so you can submit it in the last couple days if you want to. Oh, I know another one that happened. Reread it the day before and found out it was actually being accepted in Fort McMurray. Who's driving there tomorrow? Oh, I guess we are, right? So just, it's good to read it. And when you turn it in, always make sure you get a receipt with the time and date stamp. And why do you want to do that?
Proof.
Because, yes, proof, and humans, we're all humans, I think, in here, make mistakes, and sometimes your proposal could get left in someone's desk, part of it could fall off, you name it, it can happen. You just want to prove as much as you can that you submitted it on that day before that time. Oh, people have bad memories. The wrong person can be sitting at the desk. The clock can be broken. The fax machine can be broken. These are all cases in Canada. So you name it, it can happen. Just do your part and get proof of what you did. Hey, look at that. Now you're prepared to submit your best proposal, right? You have the practical tips, you know where the building is, you're gonna be able to drive down there and hand it in and go home and actually sleep for the first time in weeks. Okay, so you submit, and then, oh, sorry. There is an opening. Now, there's no need, or there's no requirement. Has anybody in here had a public opening? Or are they often public openings, or do they just open them in? Because there is no requirement for a public opening. Some people think that you have to, but you really don't. It's in the discretion. It's often better to not have a public opening for a bunch of reasons. Really, what happens at a public opening is fairly anticlimactic anyways, because it's really just vendor A and vendor B and vendor C submitted bids. Now everyone can go, right? So there's no special ceremony to it or purpose for it. But once the bids are opened, then obviously there's an evaluation period, and that's when they go and score they see if the mandatories are met, and then the desirables are scored. Okay. So if you are lucky, you are going to be called in for a interview. I talked about this a bit before. It'll tell you if there's going to be interviews, right? It'll usually set out a date too, so that you know those are, what day those are on. They tie that right into the timeline, so obviously you can make arrangements to be there. You want to think about, if you're one of the top three, obviously it's usually going to be worth it to go, but for a giant procurement, there may be a significant cost to just prepare for the interview, right? One I helped with not that long ago, they had to fly people from different countries, in some cases, to just attend the interview, let alone preparing their team and all that. So there may be a cost of time and whatever if you're traveling or staying overnight, all those things to consider. Again, they can only ask you to clarify parts of your proposal they didn't understand. You are not supposed to be presenting new information at that point. It's just clarification of what's already in your proposal. You have to know what's in your proposal. Don't get somebody else to write it and then stand up there and you don't know what's in it. You always want to send, you can, well, unless they limit the people in the actual interview, you want somebody who's going to actually be doing the services, right? That would seem like a no-brainer, but many people have found out the hard way that if they don't send somebody who knows what they're talking about, they don't get it, because you need someone that can speak to the actual services being offered. Don't send the person in management that doesn't know. That's not going to help you. Okay. Sometimes the phase of the contract just before you sign it is called the negotiation phase, which gives me heartburn as a lawyer, because you're not supposed to be negotiating anything at this point, right? So I like to call it more fine-tuning. What can you do in the fine-tuning? And I know that sometimes different things are negotiated. The problem is that between the time the RFP was issued, which maybe was January 1, and then say it closed on March 1, and now it's June 1 that it's starting, you're signing the contract right here. Stuff happens, right? Things shift. Maybe the budget gets cut. Maybe it's a different client mix. Stuff happens. So right in this phase, right before you go to sign it, all of a sudden you might have a bit different services or a bit different deliverables. You have to straighten that out, and that's part of the fine tuning. It's not really negotiation, it's a small negotiation, right? Make sure there's no outstanding issues, that you both understand what the current risks and mitigations are, because those may have changed too, right? Something may have disappeared or something new may have come up. And make sure what was asked for in your proposal matches what you're still being asked for. Those should be roughly the same still, right? You can't majorly change the services at this point. So, and who's the risk mostly on? It's mostly not on you. It's mostly on the government. But you never know. It could, well, it will impact you, right? If all of a sudden the scope of the contract goes from, you know, what you were expecting and increases like 2 times, that is a risk to you. Maybe you don't have the capacity to deal with that, right? Government's risk is they could get sued, but your risk might be, we don't have the capacity, we don't have the staff to provide that, right? So you have to make sure things are still more or less the same. Also, if the price substantially changes, again, it could drop, so that's a risk to you. Maybe you literally can't run your business on the amount of money they have available anymore. So those are things you're going to have to confirm with them before you go ahead, obviously. Okay. So these are just some nuts and bolts practical things. You will likely need to be a legal entity to do business, whether that's a society, a corporation, or acting in your own name as a sole proprietor. You will want to know what the term of the contract is versus the date being signed. You can sign a contract on September 1 that's not in effect till December 1. Legal information tip of the day: sign as far ahead as you want, but what? Don't sign after the fact, right? Lawyers don't like that. And that goes against government policy too. So just make sure you know what the term of the contract is. This may be the signing day, but the term might actually be December to, let's say December to next March, right? Which might surprise you if you were expecting it to be September to March. So just make sure you know. Clarify who your key contacts are. Get their phone numbers, emails. If there's any changes to the boilerplate terms, it's pretty late at this point, but if something has radically changed, you need to let the government know. Again, clarify what it is exactly that you're going to be doing for them. Know if they need reporting. Is there monitoring you have to give them? These are key pieces. We talked about information exchange before. They may require you to give them monthly reports on clients, especially in this area of disability services, right? There's a lot of reporting that has to happen. So make sure you know the format. If possible, get them to give you a actual format of the reporting you need to do. Saves everyone time. And maybe you have to do some kind of evaluation plan. And again, identify all the deliverables you have to do. Is there a certain number of clients per month, per week? Are there funds attached to those, units? So just make sure you have everything clear. Stay in touch with the contract manager. Don't go silent. It won't go well for either one of you, right? Okay. Some other pieces to be conscious of. If you are lobbying government, and you can actually phone, I'm trying to remember the name of the office that looks after this, but they will tell you how to determine if you are a lobbyist, okay? If you think you may be, and the problem for government is if you are accepting money for services in an area where you are also lobbying government, and again, this may have a bit more sensitivity in your area where there's obviously advocacy for folks with developmental disabilities. But if you think this could apply to you, this may be something you would like to look into or should look into. Make sure that when you're dealing with government, everybody knows what information is going to be confidential, whether that's your proprietary information or government's proprietary information, and also personal information, right? Get those things clear. Know what creates a conflict of interest. If you have a family or professional relationship which you think might put you in conflict, make sure you find out. Okay, you can ask government folks what the conflict of interest guidelines are. Again, they would need to give you that information, that input, so that you know, because you might not know what a conflict looks like. You can ask. Know that there's a vendor complaint review process. Now that's usually on the more formal procurement processes through Service Alberta. But again, we talked about debriefs, right? Those are something that you have a right to. I think I have a slide about debriefs in here. And so that's something you should be seeking, because that will teach you what you need to know for the next time, right? So it's part of an administrative fairness process where you are entitled to that, so you can insist on that as well. Again, know what conflict of interest guidelines are. Again, there's supposed to be no preferential treatment. Government's supposed to be unbiased and objective, and no disclosure of confidential information. And if you think you also may have a possible perceived conflict, that's something to address your mind to as well. Employer relationship, I talked briefly about this before, but you just want to know about this. Is this your responsibility? No. But you also don't want to end up in a situation where this is a problem for government. So just remember that there's a difference between you as a contractor and someone who's an employee of the government, right? You're supposed to be at arm's length, independent of government, and you're making a profit. You're not drawing a salary. So just make sure you have a contract, and so that everything is as it's supposed to be. A very well-written RFP will result in a more realistic proponent proposal with more accurate pricing for government and a service provider. Do you think that's true? Well, yes. That is the theory, right? So hopefully that's the case. But we've talked a lot in today about having a narrow scope so that it's the best information for both of you, and you know where the focus is for that proposal. And if you're not successful, keep going. Learn from your mistakes, right? Seek that insight in the debriefing. You can even have a debriefing if you're successful. You may want to learn why your proposal was successful, right? Again, the people in the evaluation team who are debriefing you are only allowed to comment on your proposal. They can't tell you who won, who lost, who everyone was in the process. They can only speak to what you can do better on your proposal the next time, how you can make it stronger where it was weak, or areas that they didn't totally understand. I've personally only been to one debriefing on my own bid, and I was quite surprised because it was something I wouldn't have even thought about. So it was a really good opportunity for me to think, oh, okay, we would do this totally differently on another bid. So they are useful. Remember that they can't identify anybody else, but you'll get good feedback from them. Okay, so here's my top 5 tips. I've covered some of this, but make sure you read the proposal and answer the actual questions, not what you think the question should be. Again, you might not think they're relevant, but again, you're stuck with whatever format you have, so just answer those questions. You have to answer those questions. Don't cut and paste your entire proposal. You can reuse portions intelligently. Like if you want to be prepared to go on the next one, you can have everyone's resumes ready. You can have previous projects. But again, much like a cover letter for a resume and the resume itself, you want to make sure if you're going out the next time, you want to think of the aspects of your previous projects that you did really well and how they can fit better with the one you're currently bidding on. So you might want to tweak the descriptions of your previous experience a bit. And so same thing with resumes, right? You might want to emphasize some points more than others. Limit your self-promotion. I've read some proposals that are just, and actually big companies are really terrible with this, I'm sad to say, as a rule. We're so great because 3 pages later, you're still reading. Quite often, governments who issue proposals will actually put the page limit on this just to limit that self-promotion piece. Because when they're trying to read 10 proposals, they don't want to read 150 pages, and half of it is we're so great because. You can talk about how great your solution is, but it's going to be in those sections where you're describing what you did for previous clients, right? Nobody wants to read a bunch of fluff. Explicitly explain what you do. Connect all the dots. Don't try and, we talked about this before, don't assume everyone on the evaluation team knows what you're talking about. Don't assume that they can translate all your terms into their terms. I already spoke about this too. Fully explain why you are the right person or why you have the right team for the opportunity. The easier it's to understand, the better, right? Again, devote enough time to prepare your proposal. If you decided the opportunity is worth your time, then you need to spend the time preparing it. You can always tell the difference between one that was written the night before and one that somebody spent a couple weeks on, right? There's a depth to it. There's just, it reads better, and you're not going to miss anything either, right? And look at that. Everything will turn out perfectly. So I want to thank you for your time and attention today. I really appreciate it. If you do have any specific feedback for me, I'm happy to hear it. I do want to know about it. I do like to hear if you have specific questions or ideas about how a presentation can be improved. Thank you very much. And thank you very much to ACDS for having me. I really appreciate that too. Yeah.